let's get started with the first portion of this stream. Let's get started with the new releases and stuff. That way we can just have fun here in a little bit. So I'm looking here at the albums that I specifically wish to speak about in regard to the Friday releases, and those are Battering Ram by Saxon, Hyaena by Sadist, Reign of Darkness by Circle to Circle, Out of Respect for the Dead by Grave, and A Maze of Recycled Creeds by Gorod. These are 5 albums that all dropped this past Friday, of course, alongside The Color Before the Sun by Coheed and Cambria, which we did a review of a week early, considering whenever I got that album, the release date was different than the release date that actually happened. So the information sort of conflicted a little bit, which created a bit of an issue. So in reality, it worked out because those who wanted a Coheed and Cambria album review got it, whereas if that information hadn't been conflicted with me and with mine, that review probably wouldn't have happened, and we'd be talking about it right now. To briefly speak about the album, like in basically 2 sentences or less, it's a great release, but it feels like it really requires the Amory Wars in order for it to feel like a true Coheed and Cambria album. But I love the mix. You know, it's an album that peaks and valleys very nicely, and it creates this atmosphere that it creates an atmosphere of diversity. You don't feel like you're constantly going to be on one emotional plane, and instead feels like you're going to be on, you know, really kind of ping-ponging or tennis matching back and forth between 2. Surgical Steel did win the top 35 albums of 2013. So yes, it does. Or it did, and I still do listen to Exhumed. This is a week that really seemed to favor some extreme metal with the releases from Grave and from Gorod, and also from Sadist to a certain stretch of the imagination. The last one that I was listening to prior to this stream was Out of Respect for the Dead by Grave, which has some interesting facts about it, some kind of unique things that are going on. This is an album from a death metal band that at times does not feel 100% like a death metal release. At times, it is one that is able to use pacing really to its advantage, as opposed to going at 1,000 miles an hour at all times. Especially whenever you get into Flesh Before My Eyes and Plain Pine Box. These alliterations are just killing me right now. Are really songs that showcase this, because they don't need to blister through their 5 or 4 minute runtime. Instead, they can start with an aggressive riff and then really descend and, you know, really deprave themselves down into something that's a little bit more slow, a little bit more methodical, cerebral, in fact. And whenever you continue forward through this disc, you start to realize that this is a tone that Grave had they had already committed to this on previous albums, but they have gone even deeper into sort of that mindset with Out of Respect for the Dead, especially whenever you get down to Grotesque Glory, for example, which is close to 10 minutes in length and is really a unique song by its own regard, in the fact that you would almost expect this track to be, in reality, maybe a song and then a period of silence and then maybe something in secret, when in reality this is a near 10-minute long Grave song. Grotesque Glory is exactly the best way in which to describe this song, in the fact that it is really one of the pinnacle tracks that I can think about for Grave's, you know, their more recent career. Out of Respect for the Dead, you know, the title track is really great. The same can be said about Redeemed Through Hate. These guys don't need to rewrite the playbook very much. You know, Grave has been a group that has had a loyal and solid following for a while, for a long time, really. And it's easy to see why that is the case, because they are just a very strong band that really, you know, they remind you why death metal is so, I guess, appealing to so many people. It's a reminder that death metal in a pure sense like this is just as appealing and just as sexy as all the technical death and things that exist these days. You know, you don't have to be, you know, Rings of Saturn or Necrophragus to really be a terrific death metal band. You know, to have those extra riffs and everything is kind of saucy, kind of hot, and gives you a little extra oomph. But sometimes the direct approach is great. And then, you know, you get into A Maze of Recycled Creeds by Gorod. And this is actually a great transition considering what we just spoke about with the technical side. You know, with the technical side of this genre, it does open up a little bit more of the artistic endeavors portion of the sound. And that's something that Gorod really proves with this. And they even do something that's a little outside the character. They're able to slow down a bit. And they make use of their time very nicely on this disc, especially with tracks such as Inner Alchemy, which eclipses the 6-minute mark, where they're really able to use that time very wisely and really make very poignant transitions within their sound. They're very technical in their sense, but this is more of a technical death metal style that reverts back toward the classic death metal variety. So Gorod is a band that definitely could be lumped in with some of the other tech deaths, but this is one where the death side is more so their specialty as opposed to the tech, even though it exists, if that makes any sense. Songs such as From Passion to Holiness really display this very, very nicely. And overall, the album is just a very nice listen, considering it blends that very nicely, and it really does cater to both sides of the coin. It caters to people who enjoy technicality while also catering to those who enjoy full-fledged basic death metal. You know, you have to come up and start off really, really strong with a song such as Temple to the Arc God, which really just sets things in motion with that blistering pace and really is able to examine this very quickly. But then whenever you get into Celestial Nature, which is track number 3, it's one that opens up its body. And that's where the remainder of this album goes. Once this body is opened up, it is literally being examined like an autopsy, and their sound is being examined in this case. And A Maze of Recycled Creeds is a really solid listen. It's one that I highly, highly recommend to anybody who is within this realm and hasn't checked it out already. And, you know, Gorod's a band that has really, they've been kind of an up and down group. They've always had some pretty solid material, but this is one that feels like they've really put their best foot forward. You know, they've done a lot of things right with this. You know, they did a lot of things correct. You know, then you get into something like Battering Ram by Saxon. You know, you get into this album from this new wave of British heavy metal band, this grit, you know, this very old school, old style philosophy group that just keeps on going and keeps on. Here's the thing about Saxon. Everyone has said over the past couple of years, and this is true of just about any band that has really served the test of time, especially if they were around in the 80s, that the voices have really started to decay a little bit as far as tone is concerned. They said that about Bruce Dickinson on The Book of Souls. People have said that about Tom Araya on Repentless. People have said that about Rob Halford on albums even as early as Nostradamus, and definitely on Angel of Retribution, and then especially Redeemer of Souls. And you had to show that, even though you probably didn't see it. This is a band in Saxon that does not sound like it has that aged really infused into it or injected into it, and it is there. Okay, I'm just going to say it's there. You know, some of the wails and the screams are not what they used to be, but they're still fearless with it. They are still absolutely fearless with this. And this is an album that feels like it has a little bit of like a historical story behind it, because you do get some clips within this album that really seem like they're trying to pinpoint certain elements of history or certain moments of history, especially whenever it comes to warfare. And it really paints a very interesting photograph whenever you do that. And Saxon has been a group that has always been one step away from infusing a little bit of progression into their sound, into their new wave of British heavy metal sound. It's always been something, and that's the thing, progression in new wave of British heavy metal was always sort of a presentation thing, where on the longer tracks you're going to have some deviations, but this is one where it sort of presents itself more so in the vein of atmosphere and more so in the vein of how they're able to trog along these tracks. And what really is the most illuminating portion of this album is the fact that you have solid songwriting, even with some lyricism that is not necessarily all of that stellar. It's not necessarily all of that poignant. It's just, these are tracks that you can tap your foot along to and you would love to hear live. You know, you hear something about the devil's footprint, and we've heard so many devil cliches throughout heavy metal lifetime that it just seems like another one. But instead, you have this very anthemic 4-minute long track that gives you a lot and receives your energy and just gives it right back to you. The same can be said for a track such as Destroyer, which you would almost think, oh shit, you know, Saxon does so many covers, maybe they're covering Kiss. Nope, they sure as hell aren't, because that would be really stupid. And it gives it a lot of flavor and goes right into Hard and Fast. And these are songs that are almost announcing themselves. You know, these are tracks that have that quality to it. And then you get the Kingdom of the Cross, and you have this 6-minute track that proceeded to the end, which you would almost envision, you know, Heavy Metal 101, whenever it comes to cliche, is have a song that involves the end as your final track. Saxon says, you know what? No, we're not going to do that. Second to last track. Fuck you and fuck your convention. And so the latter two songs on this album are 12 minutes of the disc, the longest portion of the disc. And both of these really illuminate what Saxon is all about. They illuminate the fact that whenever they want to write something that's loud, fast, and aggressive, they have the capability. Not to mention they have the voice and the guitar tone that really blends very well. This is the reason why this band is so ageless. This is why they've been around for 40 plus years, because they know how to write very solid music that is enjoyable, regardless of the fact that it is not, they're not a band that necessarily has had to deviate their sound very much in 40 years. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, is that they know variety when they see it. They know that if they make minor changes to their sound, such as expanding and slowing down their riffs and sort of painting a little bit more of a picture with some curious atmosphere, then you really have something even greater to go on. I think this, I'm trying to remember the track. This was a couple of albums ago by Saxon, and it's really not coming to me. Red Star Falling, it might be. Really showcased this greatly. And it was also displayed very nicely in their cover of In the Court of the Crimson King, which happened quite some time ago. It's always been present. And also, what other band do you know that really assaults their tracks with strings and an orchestra, and it sounds somehow even more epic than it did before? If you don't believe me, check out the orchestrated version of Red Star Falling and then listen to the original and let me know what you think about that. They always seem to have a song like that that is on each and every album that just really expands everything even higher and farther than perhaps they did before. And that's why Saxon is just a long-running great band. Moving on to Sadist. And it's easy for me considering Sadist and Saxon are literally one click away from one another in my little mountain here of info. This is a bit of a different album. If you have not heard of Sadist, then you are missing out on something that has a lot of potential to be one of your favorites. This is thick-based, you know, technical death metal, if you really want to call it that, or it even has more of an avant approach to it. It's one that is a little bit more experimental. They play around with some different tones. You could definitely hear some, you know, some Eastern ideas that are present in here, and you could also hear just really what, imagine what would have happened if these guys would have hooked up with Chuck Schuldiner from Death, especially during the 90s era of Death. You would have had a crazy, wildly progressive band that would have been probably right on the forefront of out there death metal. The best way that I could really describe this band is that if you enjoy Ihsahn, if you enjoy what Ihsahn is able to do and his approach to his solo work, and really I want to speak this as more so his first couple of albums as opposed to his last one, which was a very different approach and one that certainly worked for him. then if you like that style, you're going to like Sadist, because it has really solid songwriting that is not linear by any stretch of the imagination. There is some thick bass work that is one of the principal highlights that you're going to hear off of Hyaena. And I think what really is the most incredible thing about this disc is the fact that it's very consistent. It's not one that feels like it really breaks down at any point during this this playback, this experience. In fact, if I remember correctly, yes, it is. Gata One Cura is a instrumental that's on this disc. It's track number 6, and it's one that almost comes out of nowhere, and you're expecting lyricism, you're expecting something to come, but this is a track that has such a beautiful harmony and beautiful resonance to it that you are pleased whenever you realize that its 3-minute and 40-second long runtime is without lyricism. It's something that actually works very well in its favor. Sadist are a long-running group. They're one that is really not as appreciated as they should be. They are a unique device, and they are a very unique band, and they are one that is really, I feel that this group needs a little bit more attention, and I think folks need to go through their discography a little bit more in order to truly appreciate sort of where they've come from, where they've been, and what they're all about. Because this is a style of music that a lot of people like, but they just don't know the name. Either that, or they think that since it's not a band that has just come out of the gate, you know, as of recent times, they don't believe that they're going to really enjoy this group, which is just, it's going to end up being a lie. It's going to really end up being a lie, because they are just such a solid product and one that has a lot to really offer. Finally, I feel like I've only talked about 4. Which one am I missing? I'm missing somebody. Oh, Circle to Circle. I didn't listen to a lot of the Circle to Circle. Reign of Darkness is the new album, and that's no disrespect. I just ran out of time. The reason why I wanted to talk about Circle to Circle is just to recommend the band, really, to be perfectly blunt. This is one of the post-Sabotage projects that we got after the fall of Sabotage in 2001. This is one of them. Chris Caffrey went on to do a lot of solo work by himself. He's released a couple of albums, and there's another one that I can't really put my finger on. Winds, maybe? I think that's something that's completely separate. Winds is a very good group, though. We might talk about them in a 10 Awesome Song somewhere down the stretch. But Circle to Circle is a group that is pretty demanding and of a listen. You know, they have a basic heavy metal structure to them. It's one that almost resembles that classic Sabotage sound a little bit, only with a little less progression, with a little bit less of the progressive edge. They're just a really cool group to listen to if you want something that really feels a bit empowering, but at the same time, it's not necessarily, it's not a complex thing. You don't need to really sink a bunch of hours into really trying to understand what you're listening to. They're a very solid, direct, approachable band, and that's something to really be considerate of. Now, somebody, Jeremy Loss is awesome for mentioning Unexpect. Unexpect is a terrific band. A long time ago, and I'm talking the mid-2000s, I remember discovering Unexpect through somebody I was talking with on a message board. And they were just this group that this girl really, really liked. And I was talking with her about metal, and she brought that band up. I was like, hey, why not? I'm looking for something new. And those guys blew me away. They're really, really good. Very solid product, not linear whatsoever. These guys are insane. They are very creative, very experimental. Based out of Canada, I believe. I think they're a Canadian product. I think that's definitely based. I think they are based out of Canada. Unexpect is a mess. Yes, they are kind of a mess. But that's the allure. That is the draw. That is what makes it amazing, is just how chaotic it is. If you want to talk about like names that are a mess for bands, check out this one, Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum. Yeah, there's a name that's only 5 people will actually take seriously, and I happen to be one of the 5, because they actually have some pretty decent music. It's avant-garde with a bit of a progressive twist. It's pretty cool stuff. if you ever are in the neighborhood to check out something that's a bit strange. There's a death metal band called Atheist. Atheist has a little bit more of the technical variety to them. Some people even call them jazz metal. There, brother. I just missed out who you were. Ben likes the music. Yeah, you should definitely check out Atheist. They are extremely, extremely influential whenever it comes to what they have been, or what technical death metal bands have done ever since then. The whole influx of jazz metal, as they called it, with bands such as Cynic or Atheist, is certainly important, considering where everything has kind of developed and gone to today. So keep that in mind. But finally, I have to mention the new Born of Osiris album very, very briefly. Considering I'm not going to do a full-fledged album review on that because of the hiatus, and I know this is a fairly important release. To really speak real quickly, anything that was mentioned today that happens to, were to happenstance become a part of the top 50 album of the year list, because I think that's what it's going to become this year. Remember that I mentioned, I think on the last stream, that it is something that could potentially happen. That is something that could potentially happen. So these albums are not necessarily exempt from that, because I have, in fact, listened to them. With that being said, Soul Sphere by Born of Osiris. First of all, whenever I heard the name of this disc, I immediately wanted to load up Doom and just play until I found a Soul Sphere, because, yeah, that's the very first thing I thought of. So immediately I'm kind of on the fence with that name, because I don't like it all of that much. I like the concept in the game, but I don't like the concept as an album, because what does that really even mean? What does that really mean? But this is a disc, and this is a band that was coming off of the Discovery 2 albums ago, and of course tonight, the last album, Tomorrow We Die Alive, was kind of a disappointing album. But it was one that was trying to follow up a really solid release that made a lot of fans, because you had an album like The New Rain, then you have an album like The Discovery, and you're really kind of riding high. Jason Richardson leaves, so everyone's a bit curious as to what happens with Tomorrow We Die Alive. And then it ends up being this album that just doesn't have that same real punch to it, that same zip. It just feels like the songwriting is a bit weak, whereas The Discovery was sort of like this A- or A affair. Tomorrow We Die Alive was sort of like a B- to like a B affair. So it was literally one that seemed like they slipped and sort of slid down the gun a little bit instead of, aiming to fire immediately. And then Soul Sphere comes, and this album does not feel like it has even the same zip of Tomorrow We Die Alive. This is one that is kind of painting this band into the realms of conventional nature. They're really becoming a little bit more conventional for this style of music. A couple things can actually be said about that, to be perfectly blunt. A couple things can be said about the state of, metalcore or progressive metalcore, whatever you want to really, tout these guys as. We're talking about bands such as Born of Osiris, Chelsea Grin, everything of that variety, where it just seems like the sound itself, even though it does still have some expansive properties, and there's still the ability to discover some new things, some wild things, some neat things, the sound is starting to peter itself a little bit. And this happens with every song, with every sound. It's the reason why thrash metal didn't last forever. It's the reason why thrash metal also is still kind of hot to this day, is because for a while there it wasn't really the forefront of the eardrums of listeners. So whenever thrash metal came back in full force, there was this reinvigorated attitude, and that actually led to some pretty direct songwriting and some fantastic approach work. And I feel like with this style of music that these bands such as Born of Osiris are touting, it's starting to peter down a little bit. It's starting to slow up, and it is not necessarily as easy to release something that has really that big surprise shock factor effect that the Discovery really possessed just a couple of mere years ago. Because that album came on through, it had it all. It had consistent songwriting. It had fantastic, fantastic songwriting. But the couple along with that, it also had fantastic pace work, and it used what the band was able to produce in the studio. It used those group of tracks in the best possible way possible. They were able to really craft something that was very diverse while at the same time really telling a bit of a tale. And the flow job on that album is probably one of the more exquisite reasons why The Discovery is widely considered by many to be a seminal favorite, if not their favorite from the band. Soul Sphere doesn't have that. All of those things I just talked about, it doesn't have it. You know, the songwriting on it is okay. You know, it really is. It's okay. They stay within the confines of their sound. In some ways, they try to expand it with using a little bit of magic, you know, a little bit of that production magic to kind of add a little bit of depth and density to it. But whenever it really boils down to it, this is an album that just feels like, material-wise, as a whole, it's about an average to slightly above average affair. It's one where Tomorrow We Die Alive is actually the stronger album of the two. It's an experience that's a bit difficult to make it through. There are some songs that feel very in your face, very triumphant, that have that luster of, we're born of Osiris, we're here to fucking kick your ass, you know, but we're also here to make you think a little bit. That's still present, but it's not present uniformly throughout the course of the entire disc. It's instead something that really just lacks something, and it's hard to put the finger on exactly what it is that it's lacking. But it feels very uneven, and it's a shame too, because I was looking forward to Soul Sphere. I wanted to look at this album, and I actually wanted to say, I wanted and hoped to say that Tomorrow We Die Alive was just kind of a fluke. You know, it was a stumble point, and then they kind of come right back up. Because the singles, one of them was really, really bad, and another one was really, really good. And usually that bodes pretty well. You know, usually that means, okay, this is going to be a pretty acceptable release. But it was just really inconsistent. It was just really inconsistent. For that album to be on the top 50 would be a stretch, and it would be really low. You know, I'd really have to be digging for something for that to be on there as of right now. You know, these are all releases that have received, 2 listens, with the exception of the Circle to Circle, which didn't even get 1. But I really wanted to mention the band because they're a band that deserves it. I ran out of time. It happens. But it's something where subsequent listens may change things a little bit. So I don't want to put everything sort of set in stone at the moment. Follow the Signs was a catchy song. You are absolutely right. I agree completely.